everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Texas Women Photographers Circle. This is our monthly meetup. And here with me this evening are moderators Leslie Sessoms, who's based in the DFW area, and Charlie Hickman, who is in San Antonio. Sue Pitts isn't here tonight, but I am Linda Nickell, and I am based in Austin. So that's where I'm based, but currently I'm sitting in a hotel room in Washington, D.C., which is why you see the blurry outline of a bed. It's not a good background, but this is the best I could do for this meeting. So every month, I invite a guest to share their photography and some of their favorite tips and techniques to help us improve our photography and inspire us to try something new. The schedule for the upcoming presentations is on my website at lindanickell.com, as well as the links to previous sessions on YouTube. Tonight's guest is Devon Foster. Devon is a filmmaker and portrait photographer. Her work as a documentary filmmaker about ecological threats garnished her a screening at the South by Southwest Film Festival. She continues to partner with universities, nonprofits, and state departments to provide a platform for underrepresented groups that range from at-risk youth to traditional craft makers. In tonight's presentation, Fine Art Fantasy Portraiture, Devon will take us beyond the cheesy damsel in distress photo shoots, and she's going to share her interpretations of fantastical daydreams with her camera that help her create works of art. And she'll share some of the tips that you can learn to direct the scene and tell your own story. If you're on Instagram, look for her at the Devon Foster, and you can connect with her through her website, devonfoster.com. Devon, it's really nice to have you here.
Hi, Linda. Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to speak to a group that is a little bit outside of this niche that I have. I think that the Texas Women's Circle is such a cool collaboration. I went in search of women photographer groups in this area after having let's say a series of very male dominated group experiences that were less than delightful. And so I'm just grateful that you create this space for women to come together and learn from each other and support each other.
And I had said this earlier, I don't know if it was on the recording or not. I am a nature photographer, I'm a landscape photographer, I'm a wildlife photographer. People really don't fit into my wheelhouse because one, I can never get them to do what I want them to do. And I can't make them look the way they want to look. So I struggle with that. And that makes me biased by I don't invite a lot of portrait photographers to speak, mostly because it's not my interest. But I'm working through that, and I'm like you were on a call last night with a guy that does mostly portrait photography. He did something a little different for us last night, but I weave him in every time, every chance he lets me. But when we were talking, and you basically said I do more film, I was like, huh, this is going to be really handy for me. And then at some point, I think I went to your page and I'm like, sure enough, there's a link to your website. When I got to your website and I saw the very, very outside the box kind of fantasy photos, they were not like we said, there you can do cheesy, and a lot of people do cheesy. And I just kind of thought, this is a little different. This is a little bit special. And I really was trying to figure out how I could persuade you, because I know this is not something that you do. It's like, hey, I'll come speak to your group. And I was like, I'm going to make her do it. So thank you for not putting up a fight, at all.
Thank you for including me. I really appreciate that.
So, all right, I'm going to let you kind of do your thing and share your story. And I hope that everybody enjoys this as much as I'm looking forward to it, because I've met you personally, and I've got a taste of your personality, and I just think very highly of you. So let's see what you can show us.
Okay, guys, let's start this presentation. I want to go ahead and do a screen share so we can have a visual. I would think that we're all kind of visual people on
Yep.
some level. So I think that makes a lot of sense. But I think that the sort of concept for today, as Linda mentioned, is that there is a lot of, sorry, we're at the end now. There is a lot of work out there that is like kind of the traditional like fairies and princesses. And I love that. Don't get me wrong. I mean, like the Princess Bride, iconic. Um, every little girl wanted to be a fairy, so there's no reason why people couldn't dress up like that as adults now that we have the money and the agency to do that. But I think that for a lot of people that feels fake. And like the start of this concept was me talking to a friend of mine that was very artistic, but very resistant to the idea of anything that could be falling under the realm of like fantasy or like make believe or dreams or and anything that was sort of beyond realism. She was very uncomfortable with, even though she was a very creative person. And it sort of made me realize that maybe people have this idea in their heads that anything that's sort of like within the fantasy genre is by definition kind of like cheesy or fakey or maybe even sexist, like this idea that like the knight is a man and the princess is a woman and she's sort of helpless. And there are those like those old movies where women don't talk to each other and they only have two lines and their lines are like, help me, what should we do? Like, and it made me realize that like this place that I was coming from that I was really passionate about, because this is probably the thing in my life that I'm most passionate about and I feel reflects who I am the most. But it made me realize that like not everyone could connect with it because there were a lot of like kind of negative stereotypes in the way. So I feel like maybe it would be fun to kind of redefine what we're thinking of as fantasy and like the way that we can think of fantasy as like the daydreams in our own head. I think as photographers, we all come from a place of like when we take a photo, it's because we're seeing and feeling something that we want other people to see and feel. I think that is kind of like a universal language of like, I don't think it has to be people. I think it can be a flower, a bird. I mean, it could be like something ugly and it could be trash on the ground. And if that person is trying to say something about, you know, trash on the ground, that's an important thing for them to say. And so there's this like kind of element of storytelling to it. And in sharing of perspectives and emotions that we're all sort of getting at as creative people. And I think that there's something really personal and just evocative about our innermost daydreams and sort of like our innermost visual world. And I think that's sort of the fantasy world that I want to come from. As much as I love a good sword and a good knight in shining armor and a mermaid, fairy wings, but I think that we can sort of strip those things away for a second and think about like, okay, but if we created our own world and we told our own story, what would that look like? It doesn't need to have those like kind of hallmark iconographic images. It could be whatever that thing is to you that feels like your own fantasy world, your own imagination, your own escape. And so I I know that this group is very much like more photo based than like editing based. So I want to address some different sides to that. And so like with the camera techniques, like my preference for creating something that feels kind of soft and dreamy is like always lighting. I personally struggle with hard lighting. It's not my favorite. I do work with it sometimes, but I know that some people love a sunny day and they're like, yay, it's sunny, it's not rainy. And like that's the mentality. But I just want to kind of suggest to you guys and maybe even challenge to you guys like, okay, but what if it is kind of dark? What does that say? And blue hour can be tricky because you start to lose light really fast. So you want to be aware of like the skin tone, the hair tones, the tones of the garment, so that the person isn't like totally lost. Or the thing, it could be a tree. If the bark is so dark, then it's sort of like getting lost in the image. And then from there, like, I think in the modern times we're equipped with some really great denoising tools. I highly recommend Topaz AI as being like an excellent denoising tool, but I think Lightroom's denoising at this point can take you a long way. So it's a tool everyone has. It just might not necessarily be a tool that everyone has kind of like explored the full potential of yet. But when working with like a sunny day, because Texas does have a lot of sun, I'm always looking for shade. I'm always looking for ways to break up hard light. But one recommendation that I've made in the past that like I don't know that everyone's thought about is like when the sun is over your head, and like this is gonna sound obvious, but just go with me here. When the sun is over your head, right? We all know the shadows that it casts that are like kind of dark and like it's so harsh. And in a studio, like someone in a studio that had studio lights, they would light a person or anything from the side, right? Like there wouldn't be an overhead light in a studio. They would turn that off if there was one. They'd be lighting from these different sort of left and right angles. And so we can't move the sun, right? Like if what we're working with is this sun high up in the sky, like we have to move the subject. But I think a lot of people will go out into a sunny day, take a photo of like even themselves and be like, oh, delete. And like they hadn't necessarily considered like you can move. If the sun is shining down, this way instead of down this way, all of a sudden, like it's going to be saying something very different. It's going to be looking very different. So yeah, I would just want to like throw that out there to play with the angle that things are at, and think of the sun as a studio light. It can be. And then the thing that I almost put in here for myself really is like before immediately clicking the shutter button, like really look at what you're doing, because I have a tendency to get way too excited and be like, yay, click, 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 click. And then later I go home and I'm like, I wasn't paying enough attention. Um, so I think that that's a big part of visual storytelling, is like really looking and thinking about what are all the details in this scene saying. Again, like that doesn't have to just be for people. Like that can apply to anything. I think you can absolutely tell like a story with a still life. I think that could be really interesting. But it is that like attention to detail that's so hard to do when you're busy like running around and like trying to remember like, is my SD card even in here? Like all those different elements get distracting. But I kind of want to say that that's really important for us all to remember. Definitely for me. And then another thing that I do is create in the edit. So in this case, I took both of these photos. I took a photo of a model, I took a photo of background, and then they are composited together. And I know that like we've probably all seen this type of thing, and it's really common for there to be like stock photography and stuff like that. And that can probably be a bit of a turnoff for people that don't do it. It's like, oh, they just took some weird stock and sort of slapped it in there. But I think that you all probably have at this point like a pretty large library of photos that you've taken that maybe you don't know what to do with. Like they're not all hits, right? Like sometimes you have them and you're like, well, this is okay, I don't know, I don't want to delete it, but I'm not sure what it's for yet. Like it could definitely be combined in a new and interesting way with something else. Like I just get a lot out of that, and I think you guys might too. I could definitely go over some of the techniques in terms of like making the two images work together. So in this case, the things that I did in order to blend this image specifically is that the model was shot in like an indoor studio condition that was lit as close as I could get to the cloud lighting conditions. And I don't think it's perfect by any means. I think this type of editing is something that's always going to be a little bit of just sort of a guess or an intuitive process. But it's very akin to painting. And so anybody who comes from like a painting background, maybe you didn't grow up with photography. Some people actually mention that they didn't grow up with photography. But if you grew up drawing or painting, then I highly recommend trying this type of exercise because it can be very satisfying. So I was gonna say the lighting is like the first step, and then the noise and the grain sort of need to match. And then the highlights and the shadows. So in the case of like a sunset, you have these very orange highlights and these very cool blue shadows. And so getting that split toning, color balance effect on the model was really important to getting things to blend correctly. I want to just kind of like inspire and encourage you guys to think about like what fantasy or what art really means to you, and like what your own passions are. And so the reason I included this photo specifically is that this is like a series of like super sentimental things to me that no one would really maybe get out of that, but it's like for me it's incredibly satisfying. And so this location is actually a parking garage near like my neighborhood park where I grew up as a little kid. And these crazy Asiatic jasmine vines grew up the parking garage. A month, not even 2 weeks after I took this photo, was the snow apocalypse. And all of those vines were gone. So it was like such a lesson for me of like, get your ass out there and do it because you never know when it's going to go away. And I'm sure nature photographers know that, Texas is fickle, and it feels, especially us Central Texas folks, I think we always feel like all the beautiful things are being ruined or like going away. And it's a difficult feeling. And I think that that can be used as like fuel to get us creating. And then the other two things in this image is there's, of course, like a parakeet, which was the only childhood pet I ever had. I didn't have a cat or a dog or anything like that. We did have a parakeet that I was probably too young to be responsible for, and that my dad did a great job of actually taking care of the parakeet much better than me. And eventually we had it outside to like just give it some sun, give it some joy, and it got out of the cage and it flew away. So this is my imaginary scenario of my parakeet flying around my like childhood neighborhood park. And then the model in the photo is actually wearing my mother's nightgown from like the 90s. She passed it down to me. Saying something along the lines of like, I think I don't need this anymore. After a certain age, maybe I don't need sexy nightgowns, which of course I told her like, Mom, there's no such thing as too old for sexy nightgowns, but she passed it on to me and I used it in this image. And I think that it can be a fantasy world that comes from that kind of place and not necessarily a place of elements that don't like ring true to you. A lot of the things that I'm inspired by are like my own dreams or like film and television. Like I would encourage you to like, it could be a book even, read a story, watch a show, and ask yourself like, what is drawing me to this story? And how do I bring that into my work? What is moving me emotionally in this way, or like causing me to really like think about things and examine things? So I wanted to go through like almost my process of like creating things. This was one of the most recent shoots that I did. The pre-production was basically like this mood board, which a beautiful model from Equatorial Guinea reached out to me and was interested in working on this concept. And unfortunately, we were interested in working on it in January, which all you nature people know, Texas is not this green in January. There is no magic on earth to turn it green, but we went ahead anyways and gave it a shot. I was okay with things not being green. I was a little disappointed, but I was okay with that because I thought that the model was beautiful, the dress was beautiful, and as long as we had these interesting trees, we would have a lot of fun. And January is not as hot anyways, right? So we might as well get out there. And when we got there, the tree, like the day before, had been chopped to bits. Unfortunately, in this crop, because it's like a wide screen for us, you can't see all of the like chunks of lumber, but they chopped it, and then right below what's being cut off, right at the roots, just enormous like chunks that they got rid of this tree. And I'm no arborist. I don't know if this was like good for the tree or not, but it made me really sad. It seemed like maybe they could have done it in a way that was less aggressive. There was still construction trucks and vehicles in the parking lot. They had just done this so recently because I had just seen this tree and scouted this location. So my hopes were dashed. So our digital solution looks like this. And I can actually do that again for the studio audience, before and after, before and after. So what went into this, besides like kind of my typical color grading process of split toning, I wanted to create a lot of green shadows and cyan in the shadows in order to like give it a green feeling, even though like it wasn't a green location. We have some beautiful like moss on the like lower side that is bringing it a little bit, like a subtle bit of greenery, but unfortunately, we were working with what we had, and the branches were all like digitally extended. So I included this as my like recent failure slash quasi resurrection of Phoenix from the ashes story of like, even when things go horribly wrong, there are ways to find solutions and like try to create something that you can feel proud of. And even though it isn't like necessarily what I had hoped for, the other element of that was like we had been planning for 4 p.m. and then, you know, she was able to arrive by 5 p.m. So like the lighting conditions, so many things like that make it difficult. But now I'm really proud of it. This photo has received a good amount of compliments. Linda was super supportive of it. And then another guest from the other day, Stephen, was super supportive of it. And it made me realize that sometimes even when things go the worst, you can still end up with something that you feel really good about. And this is just another example of that same process. A lot of different things went into it. I did do a subtle sky replacement because I figured that if the ground was going to be sort of gray and moody, then I might as well the sky be gray and moody, because in this case, I sort of just had a white sky due to the exposure of like the tree and then the model's skin tone. So creating this like dramatic, like fantasy tree was really fun. And I want to encourage you guys to think about like physical props that you can play with. And like this definitely can be done without a human being. Like you could take a classical still life sort of approach to this as well, of like what elements do we like to play with. I love fabrics, I love flowers. If you're shooting with someone, then dresses and crowns never fail to make most people feel good about themselves. Linda had mentioned people getting their photo taken and they're not satisfied with how they look. And so there is an element of like, okay, well, what would this person feel good wearing? And what would this person feel good portraying? And I think that the minute that we are sucked into a story, that we are portraying a character or portraying an emotion, I think all of a sudden we're less worried about the little nitpicky things of our appearance. Once we have the metaphorical armor of this project and the storytelling, and this character to portray, then I think that it makes us less self-conscious. And I was going to say things to hold and touch. A lot of people, when they're on camera, like they don't know what to do with their hands. That's so difficult, like for me as well. And so think about like, okay, what could we give our subject? Can they have a piece of fruit? Can they have a flower? Can they have, it could be anything. It could be super outside the box. They could have a camera too. Like it could be kind of metal like that. I think that things that are sort of tactile really bring our character, our model into the scene. Because I think that a lot of you guys are coming from a landscape photography world. And I think that in some of my work, I'm almost approaching it like a landscape that happens to have a person who sort of wandered in. And I think that that's a really fun element to play with. I think that if you're already creating these beautiful landscapes, why not try and include yourself or a friend just sort of behind the tree or off in the distance. I think that would be a really fun, like expansive way to create, because then we have this element of storytelling to it, of like, oh, who is this person? Like, how did they get to this field? Or like, what are they doing with this in this forest? Are they lost? Are they on an adventure? And so I think that's a fun way to think about it. I wanted to show another process that like went wrong in the edit, since I showed one that went wrong in real life. This image was just sort of a spontaneous friend type of shoot to see like could we collaborate together? Could we get along? I think we're planning on actually creating a photo book that's like a poetry and photography collaboration. So I guess I'll try and keep you guys in the loop on that in the next few months. But just as a test run, so the poet and stylist is serving as a model here just for the sake of the test run. And again, it was like, horribly late at this point because people struggle to get through Austin traffic. It's notoriously the worst. And it was terribly dark. And because of that, I had this mentality of like, oh, well, I really need to brighten things up here. I need more light. I need it to be more golden. I need it to be more epic, basically. Like, I want this big moon. Like, it doesn't have enough oomph. We got to give it more oomph. And then, like, a week after that, I looked again and realized, like, well, that was silly. um I kind of overdid it. I was like, and it's totally fine if you prefer the first edit. This is just like a subjective thought process. But I went back and I looked at it and I said, okay, well, what am I really trying to say here? And then all of a sudden it was like, instead of fighting with the original image and trying to make it more golden and more ethereal or more I looked at, well, what am I really working with? Okay, well, she's sort of wearing this rosy dress. It's a bit dark in the straight at camera image, I know, but it was actually, I think I brightened it even, but she's got this sort of rosy skin tone. And then I sort of pulled back and I said, well, what about this image is important? Or what about this image inspired us when we were picking, when she was styling it? Why did she pick this dress and these flowers and this, all of these things were styled by her for a reason. And this was, supposed to be our teamwork. So once I looked at it from that angle, I ended up with a final edit that I was like way happier with. So I just wanted to encourage you guys to think about the editing process in that way. So yeah, this is my self-portrait that I included in here. That was just to encourage you guys to try to include yourself in your own images. The flowers are mostly real. They might be recognized as the famous Georgetown poppies by the Central Texas group. An old man did yell at me when I was taking self-portraits in the park. He was taking close-up, like macro flowers, and I was trying to wait patiently to cross. And after I thought that he was sort of finished clicking, I walked across the park and he goes, ugh, you ruined that one. And in hindsight, I should have said, I graced it with my beauty. But instead I said, okay, well, I guess I'll encourage you to take another. I said, go ahead and take another and I'll take some over here. I'll be over here. I won't bother you anymore. So but it turned out to be a really fun day. The rabbits are not really there. I added those in sort of recently as a fun experiment. So if you guys are interested in like more advanced compositing like that, I would be happy to go into that sometime. But in this case, what we really need to look at is just the idea of creating a self-portrait that you feel happy with. In this case, you can't see my face. I'm on a chair falling down. The falling down was only halfway intentional. But that really is the joy of it. And so yeah, I wanted to say, like, if you're creating for yourself and including yourself in your beautiful landscapes or your beautiful flower photography, or whatever you're up to, um, I think it's sort of freeing to put yourself in it, because unlike when someone else is taking a picture of you, like, you control the outcome totally. If you don't like it, you can get rid of it. But I think it's a really fun opportunity to just really sit there and think, like, who do I want to be? What do I, or what do I want to play as? What am I feeling today? What do I want to explore today? Um, and then you don't feel like, oh, well, I'm bothering this poor model with my crazy experiments. I got a lot out of doing this, and I think I'm encouraging you and encouraging myself to try it more. I think there's a lot to learn from that. So the conclusion here is just that fine art and fantasy portraiture are about creating characters that you connect with. It doesn't have to be any prescribed, preconceived notion of anything specific. It can just be the elements that really mean something to you and combining those in fun and interesting ways. So that's what I came here to say today. I hope that you guys got something out of it. And I'm super happy to talk to all of you about any of this stuff and also your own work. I'd love that. So thank you guys for listening to me.
Devon, this is cool. This is very cool. Okay, take down your screen so I can look at you and zoom to zoom and just say, I didn't know what I was gonna get, I'll be honest. And I was at that point where I don't care, because whatever she comes with, I'm gonna embrace it and keep an open mind. And it comes back to, we all have our preconceived ideas of how things should look and should be. And when we open our minds and introduce new people with new ideas to come in, it's going to spark. And I was sitting there going, I kind of want to say I want to be one of your models. And then I thought, no, I really don't. But it really made me stop and be curious. And there's a lot of work. There's a lot of editing work that you're doing in your stuff, that people like me, and there's a few of us that we just don't have the patience to sit there and play and do sky replacements. But yesterday, when I got to see, when Stephen was in here, we had a happiness hour last night, and Devon had just popped in and she wanted to share her screen. And Stephen's like, and I was like, show Stephen your work, because I know what he's doing in his profession. And I really wanted him to see what you were doing. And he was very impressed, right? And when you were
I
showing,
hope so.
yeah, he is genuine. He is, he's one of my favorite people on the planet that I've not met in person. But he, that tree, doing the compositing that you did with that, and or maybe the AI or fixing editing, that was a lot of work. And for him to go, well, wait a minute, that's really good. I mean, because we wouldn't have known if you didn't show us the before, we wouldn't have known. And so with your presentation, if anybody has any questions, pop them in there. I've already seen a couple of nice comments, and I will definitely share those with you. I'm looking for questions. And I think that I was sitting here trying to figure out, how do I summarize the work that you're doing? And I can't. And I love that I can't, because I can't stick you in a box. And I think that is when creativity is kind of it can't be, tied down to something. And I really, really look forward to seeing, and I follow you on Instagram, and I get to talk to you and have lunch with you every once in a while. But um, you blew me away with how well this presentation was done. And it
Thank
wasn't, and I've listened to a lot of
you.
them, a lot of them. I've listened to some really good speakers. And it's, if you had done that with a bird, I'd be like, oh my God, I got to sign up for the workshop. But with people, I'm like, nah, I'm still not going to do it. But it opens my eyes to the creativity that you have. So there is a question here from Sherry. She's curious, how do you find your models?
That's a great question, Sherry. Unfortunately, like, that's a big trial and error process. Some of my favorite models that I've worked with basically stopped modeling for different reasons or moved away. And so I only ever get to work with them the one time, even though it was a good experience. Other times there's people who are really have willing and eager hearts, and that's a wonderful, but it's incredibly difficult to coach somebody into experience that really takes years to do, right? Like I think I think we can probably, anybody who's been in front of a camera can agree that modeling is actually harder than some people give it credit for. Um, and that's sort of like body awareness, camera awareness, it's a struggle. And so for the most part, I am an Instagram super user like Linda. And I do my best to find people online. But for the most part, they are my friends. Every once in a while, someone will find me. In the case of the woman that from Africa in the red dress in the tree, she found me. There was a Princeton student that was originally from China that was attending Princeton that came to visit Austin. She found me, and those were some of my most fun, favorite images that I ever created. And people would argue with me. I've actually had like post comment wars about like this couldn't have been in Austin. This must have been in China or somewhere else. And because it's a very beautiful model, it's a very beautiful location. It's a very subtle and well thought out edit. I don't think I'm the best editor, but I appreciate Linda saying that if I hadn't told her, she wouldn't know. And I'm reminded of that a lot, that I might be so sneaky, people might not even realize all of the things that have gone into it.
But I think that that is, it's kind of one of those things that the more work you are doing, and you're working a photo, and you're spending a lot of time looking at it and evaluating what can I change? Did I do too much? Someone like me just looks at it for it comes through my feed or it's something I'm looking at. I don't spend those hours like I worked on it, and I'm sure you work on things and then let it go and come back to it more than once, maybe more than twice, maybe more than that. But it's that's when you are refining your art. Okay. So I think that yes, you're doing most of your art with a camera, but there is a lot of creativity that you're doing up in your brain. And you are, like you said, you are pre-visualizing, whether it's in your dreams, literally while you sleep, that are working overtime, but there's a lot of it's not like you're like, hey, let's just go shoot here. You're actually spending a lot of time and effort, and it shows in your work. So I'm just impressed. And okay, so there's a couple of questions coming through here, and you don't have to answer this, but I'm going to ask it. Danielle's curious, would you be willing to share some of your favorite locations to photograph? And I say
Absolutely.
that because I come from a nature landscape background. So, we're a little bit more careful with our locations. But if you're willing to answer that, she would love to hear what you had to say.
Yeah, I totally understand the background of photographers who are kind of sensitive about their locations. Being a photographer and being somebody that was born in Austin, I've seen the city like basically develop from this like really like small community to this like overrun metroplex thing. So I totally feel for you guys on that feeling of like if I tell everyone, they will stampede in here and throw their trash and yell at things and like but I know that you guys are all coming from like a polite, loving place that would like never mistreat the natural like beauty that we have. Texas has so little, we have to cherish it. um, so yeah, some of my favorites, gosh, I would say Commons Ford is like probably the classic Commons Ford Ranch Park. It has so many different looks. You can get a lot out of that. That massive tree is at Commons Ford Ranch Park. Um, I live in the Leander Cedar Park area, so for me, like that's my home base, my like ability to drive is a big part of it. But Mayfield Park is an Austin staple. They've got the peacocks, they've got the ponds. I think there's a lot that can be done there, location wise. I think it's just a really diverse, interesting place for how little it is and how like convenient it is to Austin. That one parking garage with all of the ivy on it was the Arboretum, which is the area I grew up in Austin. But I don't know that the ivy's there anymore. Our ice storms really ruin things. I would have recommended Crockett Gardens, which is Georgetown. But it broke recently. So I'm not sure how it looks now, but when I saw it, it was really cool.
Um,
Yeah.
I didn't want to interrupt you.
Oh, you're good.
So Sherry's question is, I like this one, Sherry. Sherry, you're gonna come to her. Her question is, do people come to you with fantasy photo ideas? Or is it up to you? You're the photographer, you figure it out. Just make me look amazing.
That's a super good question. Almost never does anyone approach me with a more developed idea than make me look amazing, or I really like the color purple. Like since we're wearing purple today, like that's usually the amount of thought that anyone who approaches me has put into it. That being said, I do ask people if it's something that's unpaid, it's just like a collaboration for the joy of creativity, then I will try and remember to be sure and say, like, what are things that speak to you? What are some things you would like to explore? And then also, of course, like, what are you comfortable with in terms of like nudity or like, the physical dangers that the natural world presents? Texas is hot, Texas has snakes, all these things. So I do try to encourage people to share that with me, but I haven't really had a lot of people approach me with their own idea. But I would be totally open to that.
Cool. I want to read a comment to you. Maybe if anybody's watching, it might occur to them. So Charlie's in San Antonio and she knows, and she's in San Antonio, you're in Austin. There's wherever you are, there's probably a group. But she says there are a bunch of photo Facebook groups and they allow models to let people know that they're available to, hey, they're looking to build their portfolio. So she was going to suggest that to people in the room and to maybe even you to look for those groups, because that's one way that you can build your portfolio. They get their photos, you get people that really want to be there, so just an idea. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions. Devon, this was really cool. And, I say this all the time to speakers that, I can't believe that you agree to do this. But I really do appreciate it because I've been working on this was my COVID project. It was the happiness hour. That's what it started as. And it still is going. And we're about on our 4th year. We're just about on April 1st. The happiness hour will celebrate 4 years. Jama Pantel, can you believe it? But as a spinoff, when I started moderating for this Texas women's group, Texas is so large and we just can't do meetups. Charlie's in San Antonio, I'm in Austin, Leslie's in Dallas. One, it's just the distance between all the groups. And two, I work a full-time job. It's hard to find that extra time to do this. So that's why I started, hey, let's just do a Zoom meetup. I'll bring in a speaker. We'll see we'll just throw a dart and see what happens. But as I'm being selfish, instead of the happiness hours like Linda's selfish hour, I have been able to build such a diverse group of speakers and topics about photography. And, like I said, I'm not a people portrait photographer, but I've had you on now. I've had Jama on. Danielle, I'm coming after you. But each time I listen to somebody say something, I pick up a little snippet of a tip and I get to apply it to my photography. Maybe it won't be a person, maybe it's going to be a bird, but I've learned something from you guys. So thank you for giving up your Thursday evening to come and talk to a room full of, strangers. But honestly, it's other women doing photography just like you are. We all come with different goals on what we want our art to be. I know, I believe it was Sherry that's in this room that said, she's just coming back from, she was a film photographer and now she's trying to reignite her passion. So kudos for her to come into a room of people she didn't know. So that's what is so cool about this program, and for you to contribute. I am immensely grateful. And so at some point we will go and have lunch because I want to celebrate it. So, all right.
Yeah. Thank you, Linda. We're not so far. We can definitely
We
do
can,
that.
I know you
Good.
introduced me a really good restaurant in Georgetown, so we need to go back. So, all right, our next meeting is on March 7th. Gail Fedek will be here to share her presentation, The Beauty of Wildflowers. Until next time, I hope that you get a chance to get your cameras out and play, and we'll see you in March.